A spontaneous and unrehearsed interview.
Hello and welcome to the 97th episode of Curiosityness. I am Travis DeRose, the host that you're listening to this very second, and maybe you'll be eating some seaweed pretty soon. I think you'll be eating a lot of seaweed soon, and you're going to like it. It's going to be tasty, it's going to be healthy for you, and it's going to be saving the planet. It's going to be sustainable, it's going to be cheap. Oh, it's great. So that's why I have on Bren Smith. He's the author of a book called Eat Like a Fish, My Adventures as a Fisherman Turned Restorative Ocean Farmer. So that's what Bren is. He's a restorative ocean farmer. He farms and grows things in the ocean like seaweed, oysters, all kinds of stuff. So we talk a lot about that and why growing things like that in the ocean is kind of better than fishing or like a fish farm or something like that. And the benefits that come with, an ocean farm, like taking carbon out of the water and the air. And all these things you can do with seaweed too that you wouldn't even think of just because we're not using them right now, like feeding seaweed to cows as like livestock feed, and it reduces the methane emissions from cows, which is messing up the global warming issue. So man, there's just so much stuff. It's so fun. We kind of talk about how to start your own underwater farm and become an ocean farmer if you want to. GreenWave is Bren's company who helps with that. So it's a really, really interesting, fun episode that really gets me excited for the future. So without further ado, let's get to the episode with Bren Smith. All right, Bren, we're going. How you doing, man?
Good. Great to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, heck yeah. Excited to talk because I've been through your book, read the whole book. I got it freaking, all marked up and all this crazy stuff. And I mean, Eat Like a Fish, it wouldn't have normally gotten me probably. I'm not a fisherman. I don't eat seaweed, never heard of this stuff. But damn, your story, dude. And it's what you're doing is so exciting to me. And I have no background in it. So it's awesome.
Oh, thanks so much. It was definitely the only book I'll ever write. My favorite review, some guy said, God, I feel bad for his mother. Yeah, that's about right.
Right, man. Well, congrats on writing a book and getting through it. I'm never writing one, that's for sure. And also, man, great. I gotta say, great color on the book. I always take the book jackets off. This green and blue here, great choice. Yeah. Love it. Yeah. So I mean, I figure we'll just dive into your story a bit and, kind of get started. But because you started off as kind of just a classic deadliest catch style fisherman, right? Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Newfoundland, right, which is the edge of the earth. Like literally, it was the most eastern point in North America. And sorry about that. Shit. Sorry about that. So it was, it's edge of the earth. And it was before Deadliest Catch in that this was the idyllic artisanal fishery. Like I grew up next to a fisherman's co-op, red, green, orange houses painted literally with leftover boat paint. And we'd always say like, oh, you painted that so you can find your way home drunk in the fog.
Right.
And, we used to sell cod tongues door to door, flakes, like everything that every little Brooklyn foodie wants out of sort of the food wonderland fetish,
sure.
Right? That's how I grew up. But my heroes were really fishermen. I mean, it was, and I've thought through my life, as I was doing the book, wondering why, like, oh yeah, tough and all this stuff, but there's something else. And it's really that, you see them go out on the horizon, their boats, they have no bosses, self-directed lives, succeed and fail on your own terms, and this pride of feeding your country. And I think that seeped into me deep, and not in a conscious way. But like if I look at my life, I was always like, nope, no bosses. Like not doing it, right? I want a job that I'm proud of. Like these, you rack them up. And so over the trajectory of my life, I look back like the measure of success is, did I end up in a job that retains the soul of a fisherman?
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Cause I mean that you just kind of grew up around that. That was kind of your lifestyle. That's what people did. And so that's kind of just how you fell into it sort of almost, right?
Yeah. I wasn't like in, sophomore English class and read a book and was like, yes, I'm going to Alaska on a walkabout. You know, it wasn't that. It was like just in my blood. But yeah, so I fished there, and then I headed. My parents headed down to the States, and I tried that, and it did not go well. Like I dropped out of high school almost immediately. Okay. Man, the suburbs are a violent place. Like, sure. They're like just some sick fucking people, the suburban kids, you know? So I just went out to the fishing boats. I was like, no, these people are crazy. Right. They're just like, they're cruel. It's a cruel bunch, you know?
Yeah, man. No, so I mean, that was just your world. That's where you fit in, was, you know, fishing. So you're doing that, but how does that kind of, I guess, come to an end, or what are the issues with that?
Sure. So, I was fishing in Gloucester, and then I headed to the Bering Sea, which is like the next step up, right? You know, for a young fisherman. And that's when I met industrial fishing, right? Okay. And this was the late 80s. And, you know, huge trawlers, like, you know, humans get too good at what they do, and we got too good at fishing. It was clear that this wasn't sustainable, right? I mean, it was like, yeah, if you've got a 10-year plan and you're going to fish every fish and then get out, yeah, it's a good plan. But if you want to die in your boat one day, if you want to you fish for 50 years and hand it over to your kids, there's just no way. Yeah. The younger generation, we knew it. We love those jobs, though. Like, I still miss being a pillager, right? You know, not because it was pillaging, but like, you know, that humility of being in 30-foot seas, you know, working with 13 other people for months at a time in the belly of a boat, right? There's just nothing like it. So it's that conflict of like the coal worker loving your job, but knowing and learning over time how problematic it is, and just that conflicted heart. Ooh. So then the cod stocks crashed for me back in Newfoundland. Like, I was in Alaska, 30,000 people were thrown out of work. And that was the wake-up call for me. Largest layoff in Canadian history. Wow. And it was like overnight. And I think that's where you learn. That's where I was like, oh, there are no jobs on a dead ocean. You know, like, it took hundreds of years to build up this economy. It disappears overnight, and I'm looking around, and there's like hungry ghosts just wandering the streets with no meaning and no livelihood. Damn. So yeah, I think that was the end of fishing for me, was that first ecological collapse.
And so, yeah, what was kind of the actual cause of that? Was it just like overfishing, doing too much?
Yeah, it was it's definitely overfishing. I mean, the heartbreaking thing, it wasn't like the small day boats coming out of Petty Harbor that were, you know, pillaging the ocean, right? You know, they're literally digging for cod, one cod at a time, maybe a couple nets in, stuff like that. It was that the shape of the Grand Banks, it's called the head and the tail. It goes like this, and international waters sits just like you can be on the tail of the Grand Banks and still in international waters, and the codfish follow the edge of that shelf. Okay. And so all the boats would sit just at international waters and just clean up. And they were the same fish we were catching inshore. And then they started coming further in, and it was, you know, it was brutal. Even inshore, you know, the Canadian government was subsidizing all the huge fleets for all sorts of, you know, political reasons, stuff like that. So yeah, we just, you know, we fished out the fish. There's no question about it.
Man, shit. How depressing for when you're doing something like maybe your family's done it for, like hundreds of years, like you said, and then for it to just be kind of taken over by these other massive companies or whoever they are.
Totally. And there are two stories that you hear told in Newfoundland, and they both have like that subtext, that meaning that you're saying. One is about, you know, is this about money? So it's about an old guy that gets paid out by the government to beach his boat. They buy his permit, like a lot of money, like a really fair deal, right? Mm-hmm. And then he buys a new truck, and every morning he drives down to the docks to drink himself to death. Like, this isn't about money. And then the other story people tell is the fish plant that was taken over from a New York entrepreneur, right? Was going to come up and reemploy everybody. And people were all excited. And then they found out that the job was making seatbelts for pets. And like, that story is like, we don't want any job, right?
Yeah, what?
Like, we want jobs with purpose, right? Like, and talk about like existential meaningless, like making poodle car seats or whatever the hell it was. You know?
Right. Well, maybe you saved some poodle lives, you know?
Yeah, I hope not.
Damn. Okay. So what do you do after that? How do you find, your next thing in life?
Yeah. So we were sold as a sort of young generation of fishermen. The next thing was aquaculture, and that was farming fish. And that was supposed to, protect fish stocks and feed the planet and create all these new jobs. It was like, fisherman 2.0. And so I tried to go to school for it. And, but I didn't, I showed up to the graduate school. I remember I bought a suit and I went there, and they had new aquaculture schools for graduate students. And so I went, and I still hadn't finished my undergrad. And they were like, "You haven't taken math, science, like any of this?" Like, no, not even close. So then I went to work on the farm. So I worked on the salmon farms, and honestly, it was terrible, right? I mean, just like fish, just just gluttonous things that don't look like fish, they don't taste like fish, and the industry took all the lessons, the mistakes of land-based farming, like pig farming, and just moved it out to sea. Pesticides, waste, all these things. And now aquaculture is still the worst brand name in the grocery store. Now it's tried. I've got many friends in the industry and are trying to do it, make it better, but it's still in essentially environmental R&D stages. So I left the salmon farms pretty disillusioned, but began asking this basic question, which is like, what's unique about the ocean as an agricultural space? Like, okay, I was a hunter-gatherer. I got moved into farming. It was bad farming. And so, but the question is like, okay, is there something unique that where we don't just grow around wild taste? Like, so we don't grow salmon and tuna just because people want to eat them. Let's ask the ocean, what do you want us to grow? What makes sense? Sure. And when you ask the ocean, what does it make sense to grow? It says really simply, why don't you grow things that don't swim away and you don't have to feed?
Right.
Really simple. Yeah. And it makes for like cheaper business because you don't have overhead costs, right? There's no big structures. There's no nets. You don't have to. And as soon as you make that conceptual shift, it changes everything in the water. And you really begin, it opens up a whole new frontier of agriculture, at least for me,
Yeah. I mean, damn, that sounds great. But like, was that kind of stuff? And this is like, you're talking about now kind of growing like seaweed or an oyster farm or something like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
because what happened was I left the salmon farms and I chased a woman, not like chased inappropriately, just like she wanted me to come, but ended up in Long Island Sound outside of New Haven, like the weirdest place for a Newfoundlander to end up. And so I was lost just trying to search of what to do. I'll never forget my first day. It was the suburbs of Connecticut. I showed up and she was sitting in my car, an old car. And I went to pay for gas inside, and a cop came up to her, knocked her window and said, "Are you okay, ma'am?" And I was like, I'd been in the suburbs for like 4 hours. Anyway, that was my experience with Connecticut, is how it started. But it turned out in Long Island Sound, there was this incredible hundreds of years of history of shellfishing. And it's just a totally different world. So I was like, Cal, I'll become a shellfisherman. I'll become an oysterman. And this was early 2000s. And it was just the beginning of like boutique oystering, right? Where you began to hear in Brooklyn that there were brands and the chefs began using them and stuff. But I thought it was going to be easy. And I was the worst. I killed millions and millions of oysters. I was running a death camp. Like, I couldn't say I was a farmer. It was like I was a funeral director. I take all these beautiful little seeds that were this big and then just kill them. And it was cruel. Like, grow them out like from here to like this big and then kill them.
So close.
Because it's a different set of skills, a blue thumb, right, where you're cultivating, you're sort of encouraging, you're working with the waters to sort of grow this thing, as opposed to, going and like getting excited about clubbing a cod over its head because the grunt it makes. It's like it's just a different kind of life.
Right. Yeah. So, but there were already people doing this, and they had learned how to make it happen at least, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. What I do with regenerative ocean farming, it's just I'm a moment in this 3,000 year history. I mean, indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest were actually the first, what I think of as ocean farmers. They were creating clam walls. So they create these walls to collect clam seed and then nurture and use certain kind of muds and stuff to grow clams. And that's, that was early cultivation. And in here, people have been oystering for, 200-300 years. And so I just sort of hopped into this tradition and then just tried to figure out how to do some innovation in it.
Yeah, right. No, nice that it's already, you found this, it kind of like hit those requirements of what you were looking for. But why was it so hard, to get into it? What were the issues with it for you?
Well, I mean, one, it was boring as hell. It's like a 7-minute ride out on your boat to this flat little area of water. And you turn off your engine and then you're just like in these 20 acres all day. And then you go home and sleep in your bed. And so it really was a change in my nervous system, where it was like slow and steady. It wasn't about thrill. It was like the thing about fishing is you never know what's going to come over the gunnel. Right. Mm-hmm. And there's just a real excitement to that. And the ocean is just such a complex, beautiful and magical place, but I always knew what was going to come up, like in my cages and stuff like that. So, I had to change, and it took a while, but over time I really fell in love with it. I fell in love with sort of the sort of steady and there isn't like pride in catching a fish. Maybe if you're like, a recreational fisherman in some context, but like, it's not the same thing. Like it's not like you grew this fish, right? But there's incredible pride when you've like shaped the cup of an oyster to exactly what you want, right? Through tumbling. Or there's incredible pride of pulling, 15-foot walls of seaweed out that started as just microscopic and you've been, working it all year. So, that was the journey.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I would never have really thought of that perspective where how fishing would just be so much more exciting, but farming's a bit of a, it's the retiree's hobby of choice.
Yeah. I hang out with freaking Arugula farmers. You know what I mean? It's like drink tea. I get beat up. Like if I went to the crow's nest and stuff, I get beat up, like best case, I get laughed out of the bar.
Okay. So you kind of get into it. And then, so are you able to kind of like, how does that progress? What are you growing? How are things going with that?
Sure. So I started with oysters and learned there and like built a successful business and started like a, equivalent of a CSA, community supported agriculture. So this was community supported fisheries where people would come and buy a share of the farm. And was selling a lot in Brooklyn and things like that. So I was successful, so I just got to that point. That was like 7 years in or something. And then Hurricane Sandy and Irene came in 2 years in a row and wiped me out. 1 year's one thing. You're like, crappy year, rebuild. But 2 years in a row, you just realize this is the new normal. Mm-hmm. And that was like, once again in my life, I found myself at the sort of a canary in the coal mine of an ecological crisis. This was supposed to be a slow lobster boil, climate change, right? 100 years. So you thought it was completely here and now. And I think that's what the rest of the country's waking up to now. Like this is not a 2100 problem. This is here now in a serious way. So those of us on the water are experiencing. I mean, there's no lobster in Long Island Sound because they all moved north. Like fishing is just completely dead. Water temps have gone up. Like, we see all these new species. It's just happening so fast. But so, after Irene and Sandy hit, that's where it was a moment for me where I just had to decide, like, am I going to get pushed off the water or am I going to figure out a way to stay? Right. And it was really depressing. It was hard. I actually pushed myself like right after one of the storms. I went out too early and my block broke on my boat and I got blown up on the rocks. Coast Guard had to come. Like I was just out there trying to save the farm. But after that, and this is what gives me a bit of hope for humanity, like in crisis, backs against the wall is maybe where humans are at our best. Like, let's hope, right? And so I just had this choice, and like just to figure out, okay, how do you farm in the era of climate change? And that's where I began really shifting and changing my farm over time. I lifted it off bottom in order to deal with those mud storm surges that came in. I started growing all different species year round, all shellfish and seaweeds, so that I'd have a crop every season. And seaweeds I picked because it was post-hurricane season. It went in November and December as a winter crop, and then I harvest in the spring. So just really trying to think, like, what's the architecture and design in the age of climate change? And I'll give another example. Like, our farms are really simple, right? It's just anchors with some ropes going up to the surface, and then horizontal lines just below the surface, right? So rope scaffolding. Think of it that way. And then we hang we seed our seaweeds, and it grows on the lines vertically downwards. And we've got mussels and mussel socks and scallops and these things called lantern nets, and then oysters and clams. But one of the keys is not to over design in the ocean. Like, it's a very unfriendly place to grow. And so one thing we learned was, like, be a willow, not an oak. Right? So don't try to, the storm comes through and make sure everything's so strong it could handle anything. You're never going to fight the ocean. Let everything sink and bend underwater, and then let it pop back up. And that's an architecture. That's like designing with nature, right?
Sure.
I think that was a really, I never think of myself as a designer or something, but that became a core concept. And then just accepting that your farm is going to get destroyed sometime. Mm-hmm. And work that into your business model. And that means, okay, keep overhead low. Like, pick crops where overhead is low. Make sure your gear isn't that expensive, because you're building volatility into your business model. And I think this is what I'd recommend a lot of other industries do the same thing, because you're not going to fight against climate change, right? You just need business models that handle volatility.
Right. So was that kind of the big innovation, at least for you, was to kind of get it to where it could coexist with these storms and things and survive, and also the idea that you would have crops kind of year round? Yeah.
And it was, there are other things like being able to designing it so we could lower the lines into colder waters. So like if we get huge spikes in temperature, I lower the lines so I'm sitting down there so I don't get early biofouling or it doesn't die, right? And then being able to raise it so I could actually store it underwater, right, during these peaks. That's another would be another example. But one of my biggest fears is, can I stay ahead of this climate curve, right? And this is where I just need to team up with scientists all the time. It's really, really key because I will not be growing the same species, I'd say, even a decade from now.
Really?
Yeah, like my kelp, I grow it at the southern region right now of its natural habitat. Well, that's moving north. Now we can create more climate resilient kelps, but like it's just eventually here it's not going to work. So I'm going to find new species, and that's harder than it sounds. There are 10,000 plants in the ocean. There's something we can grow everywhere, but can we make it economically viable for the farmer to make a living with that particular crop? We figured that out with our shellfish and seaweeds, but like, those, people are like, be climate resilient by growing nori. Well, that's a very complicated question, right?
Right. Yeah.
From the farmer perspective.
Yeah. So when you're figuring out these, to kind of grow things like the seaweed, vertically or whatever, is that just you drawing this stuff on like a napkin, or how's that process work?
No, I just steal from everybody.
Sure.
Like individual inspiration is just a total myth, right? I mean, it's total, like the whole idea of the entrepreneur and all this stuff, like, give me the bank robber, like that's the word, or like the idea robber or whatever. That's actually what's going on. And so I just have a long lineage of people that I've learned from, sort of brainstormed with. What you need in order to innovate is a network of people to be in continual conversation with, who are like experts in different pieces of it. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Charlie Arish, who's down here, he's an expert in seaweed farming of kelp. So it was like, that was absolutely key for then incorporating that into my vertical farm, right? And he came to my wedding, right? He's like a dear friend now. We've been on this journey, and now, there are things that I do that, so I can bring some new things to the industry that he hasn't seen. So I'd say a broad network. But you do obsess. Like, there is no moment I'm not thinking about ways to tweak the farm, because that blue collar innovation is what's really fun, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the great thing about being in the water is you get to be an engineer, right? You get to be a farmer, you get to be a citizen scientist. Like, you need you need finance and business skills. Like, you need to group all these together, and it makes it a pretty creative occupation, I think.
Right. So how does like ocean farming compare to like land-based, farming or agriculture? Why are you doing all this stuff in the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, it is a stupid place to grow food, right? Underwater. Because, like, think about it. I can't control my soil.
Right.
Like, it turns over 1,000 times a day. It's the most unstable place to grow food on the planet. And I can't see what I grow. Which is a problem.
Yeah.
Like, I've got to actually go, what am I going to lift up every inch of the farm every week, to inspect? Like, I can't just walk my fields and be like, oh, there are slugs coming, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I can't, or whatever the freaking kale farmers are worried about. I got no idea. That's it's just a huge challenge. On the flip side, there are zero inputs, no fresh water, no fertilizer, no feed, which is just so efficient. All I need to do as a farmer is find that nutrient sweet spot for each species in the water column, right? And just like add and subtract buoys and things like that. So it makes a lot of sense. There. I'll say one thing that's happened to me, who's become increasingly anti-technology. As like, the technology companies have become the old new tobacco companies, like we all think we're in this direction. But I've now concluded technology is absolutely essential because I can't augment the soil. So we rely heavily on sensor technology, ROVs, all sorts of stuff to track what's happening in the water. Because like a 2-degree difference of when I plant my seaweed, say, will translate into like a third higher yield.
Wow.
Like, it's just stunning the way it happens. And so right now with GreenWave, our nonprofit, we're working on this farmer dashboard, which will actually upload live data for every farm, mm-hmm. which will be really, really key. Because right now, as a farmer, I don't know how much folks know about the ocean, but we have to rely on NOAA buoys, which are like hundreds of miles off, right? They're millions of dollars. And like, to get wind, wave, water temperature, stuff like that, it's just not, I need to know exactly in this, hectare of water, what's going on.
Right.
And allow for that precision farming. So we've become big fans of technology. One of the things that's interesting for us is we've created these data platforms where we're installing sensors, we're maintaining them, we're doing physical data collection ourselves, and all that data has value. Can we create harvestable data that we can sell? Right? Oh. And this is another piece of climate resilience. Like, everybody thinks farming food, and instead we need climate resilience is about, to me, like, what are all the different income streams you can create off of this patch of water? And data is one. Like, do the insurance companies want that data to mitigate their risk, to know exactly? Like, I have a friend who has a sensor, for example. It predicts tidal heights with 30% more accuracy than NOAA data. Stunning, right? So imagine if we just distributed 1,000 ocean farms all as data points, we pool that data and that's another crop that we harvest. Right?
Yeah. That's very cool. That's something that you wouldn't even, initially think of, but hell yeah, it's so obvious when you kind of get into it.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's very cool. And then so you mentioned it, but I just think it's so amazing how you can just kind of put seeds down there, and then you don't have to water it, you don't have to put nutrients or anything or all this stuff. It just sort of grows itself.
Yeah. It's like, the kelp just soaks up carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sunlight. And it just makes it so easy. Like, I wish it was more complicated. It sounds smarter, but it's just like really, really simple. There's some tricks and stuff like that. And,
Sure.
You need the right patch of water. But again, when you make that psychological shift of being like, what's special about the ocean?
Mm-hmm.
It is that you can grow zero input food. And that's going to be so key. Like, yeah, seaweed's disgusting, right? But I guarantee people are going to be eating it because of the climate economy, right? Like, as water prices go up, feed, fertilizer prices go up, land gets more scarce and more expensive. More and more of the land has been sucked dry of nutrients. Prices are going to go up. And we're already seeing this for land-based food. Well, zero input food is going to be the most affordable food on the planet at some point. And that's going to move it to the center of the plate. It's why I actually have real confidence. I don't eat seaweed. My wife does. I'll never go there. But I do believe that, taste does shift around affordability.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, because we should, because you mentioned this before too, about how there's fish farming or whatever. We're kind of growing fish because that's what people want to eat, right?
Yeah.
That's just kind of what the market demands.
Yeah.
But you're taking it from a different angle of like, well, let's kind of tell the market what's cheaper and, also healthy for them and that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And think about what the market is demanding. The market is demanding 20th century food, right?
Yeah.
We need a whole new climate cuisine that is built around what the earth can provide in these climate conditions within a deeply destable political environment globally, right? Like, all this sort of stuff is going to affect food. And so I don't care what markets say. I care what the ocean says and what it'll provide. Mm-hmm. And then it's not like markets will follow, but like, me following markets is definitely not the answer, because the ocean's just going to be like, I don't care if you want that. That's right. Not what's for dinner, right? That's just like, but one of the reasons, so the challenge with dealing with taste is that it's slow, right? To shift taste. No question. And we don't have a lot of time, right? We know that. We get 9-10 years to seriously reformat the food system. And one of the reasons I like kelp is that it can be used for so many things. So my harvest last year was used for, cute little Brooklyn things like, pickles and, kimchi's, but it was used in plant-based burgers. And then a whole section of it was used for fertilizer and compost.
Yeah.
Right. Because farmers need all these things that are in the water, micronutrients, the nitrogen, stuff like that. I can soak it up with my kelp and bring it to them as soil additives. And in fact, that's a great model for me, because the longer I leave my kelp in the water, the more things that grow on it, the more nutrients that are. So think of it, it's almost like being mixed. The fertilizer is being mixed naturally on the farm, right? It added value every time a sea squirt attaches and grows, and epiphytes and stuff. And then the third market I'm doing is bioplastics, which is totally legit. You can make straws and packaging out of seaweeds now, which is great for me as a waste stream, right? So you take it, and there are just some great companies around the country and the world that are doing high level production of seaweed straws, which is so cool, because plastics is a huge issue in the ocean. Mm-hmm. So here I can grow seaweed and replace plastics.
Yeah.
Right? with partner companies. So I say kelp is the soy of the sea, but not evil, right? Because it's like soy industry, 1950s sat down and was like, no one's going to eat soy in America, so let's put it in everything, and it is in everything. So we're going to do the same thing. Like we're going to take our kelp and weave it through all these different industries, which has an incredible carbon impact because we have such a low footprint. Like the more we can get our ocean-based vegetables into other industries, it has a drawdown effect on carbon.
So we could be eating it and not even really know it soon.
You got hide the gross stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like hide the peas, you know.
Yep. So what's kind of the distribution, I guess, of how much is going to food and plastics and all fertilizer or whatever it is?
Well, that's what it depends farm to farm, year to year. So it depends. Like some years you'll get 70% food grade out of there, where and you want that, it's a higher price,
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then you'll do fertilizer and bioplastics with that 30%. Other years it'll be like you'll get like herring will set on your kelp, say up in Alaska, herring roe, and that makes pock marks, and then it's not great for food. It's like it creates all these sort of like it scars it.
I see.
Well, that's really good then for fertilizer. So most of your crop will go to fertilizer. So it's really important when you come into the industry to have like a whole leaf strategy, mm-hmm. so that every year you can be balancing that out. So the answer is it's very inconsistent.
Okay.
That's what the challenge is. The other challenge with seaweed is you got to get it processed within about the first 12 hours.
Whoa.
Or else it really starts to break down. So, and that is expensive. Like getting it from the docks and processed in mass in such a short period of time, it's a real challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, oh man. And then what's the story with like cows eating kelp and reducing methane? Is that happening, or what's going on with that?
Yeah. So there's two things. One is, cattle and deer and all sorts of sheep have always eaten kelp. I've got pictures actually up in Maine and the Hebrides Islands where farmers would take their livestock and leave them on rocky shores, and they'd just eat kelp, and it would actually change the flavor of. So kelp raised beef was like the highest praised priced beef in France.
Wow!
And no one I know anywhere in the world is making a kelp raised beef. Like somebody needs to do it. Like forget grass fed beef. Like we'll blow it off the table. But so there's that. But then there's another type of seaweed, Asparagopsis, that if you feed it to cattle, you get a 58% reduction in methane output. And you only need to give it 2% diet of Asparagopsis. So methane, as you know, is like the great, powerful, dangerous greenhouse gas, and it's a major challenge with cattle operations. So a slight bit of feed, you can have a massive climate impact. And I mean that's part of what's nice about this, and that my farm was destroyed by climate change, and now I can be a piece of the puzzle of the solution, right? So my kelp soaks up 5 times more carbon than land-based plants. Like whenever I take my seaweed and I get it into the soil on a land-based farm, that captures carbon, right? And that's a wonderful thing that I can be a climate farmer and sort of part of a solutions-based economy in my own small way.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's crazy. And so, to your knowledge, are cows being fed kelp now?
Absolutely. It's come out of trial. There are a couple of companies that are producing commercial grade feed. Absolutely. And so what's funny is that although it wasn't done for environmental reasons, in San Diego in the early 1900s, there were 1,500 workers processing fertilizer and cattle feed out of wild kelp for 1,000 Midwest farms. So this was something that was done because the land-based farmers knew that these nutrients were things that would have important. In fact, if you feed, there's long tradition, and now it's improved by science, that people fed kelp to their pigs, and you'd have a higher piglet mortality would drop. And this is what all the old-time farmers knew. Well, then everybody did some science, and it turned out to be true. So this land and sea connection, like this looping of the nutrient loop is something that's been going on for the longest time. Which, many ways science is just catching up with it.
Yeah. Damn, man, this is so cool. There's so many benefits of it. It's so exciting when you really jump into it and you learn that, can reduce, the methane and soaks up carbon. And then it's pretty healthy for humans to eat too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's packed full of vitamin C. I mean, you're not going to get everything out of kelp, but if you look at the sea vegetables, like a nori has more iron than red meat. Right. And all these things are packed full of omega-3s. It's the only place you can get, besides fish, it's seaweeds that are packed full of omega-3s because fish eat the seaweeds. I mean, that's how they get their omega-3s. It's an original use of it. So, yeah, I mean, it wasn't towards the end of the book that I realized that, there was an entire lost culinary history in the West of eating seaweed. So it was an Irish and Scottish bar snack. They'd serve it to people because it would make them drink more, right? The French and the Italians did a lot of fermented dishes with it. There was people who used it for breads. There was the kelp highway that went on the entire, up through Peru, where migrations tracked kelp, and you can find seaweeds 100, 200 miles in the cooking areas and stuff like that. It's been core. And then McDonald's had a seaweed burger in the early 1990s for 5 years that became the official burger of the National Basketball Association. Wow. It was called the McLean sandwich, right? So this is something that's been, eaten before. It just got pushed off the plate really by soy, went on to soy and meat. Really? Okay. So is it starting to come back now? Are you seeing more and more of it being, pushed onto plates? Yeah. I mean, it's like driving a van and all you see is vans. So I see a lot, but yeah, I mean, demand has definitely gone up. I mean, the benefit is that we're in this great culinary moment with chefs. I mean, who would have guessed that America would be this, hotbed of good, deliciousness, right? And it really is. And so I've got a bunch of recipes in the book done by some chefs. And one of them is barbecue kelp noodles with parsnips and breadcrumbs. And think about that. You get the heat of the barbecue sauce, that roundness of parsnips, the crunch of the breadcrumbs. And you don't think twice that it's kelp, right? Right. It's just delicious. So we tapped into these chefs who specialized in making vegetables unhealthy, to get people to eat vegetables and shift taste, right? Mm-hmm. And that's exactly was the sort of our sweet spot. So we've had, a lot of the value-added companies are really benefiting. And plant-based burgers is of course everywhere big, and it's most of them already use seaweed. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, because that seems like the most likely way that people in my life would start to eat is if it's just kind of included in the food that they're semi used to eating, because I mean, I shop at Trader Joe's, but I think they sell a seaweed chip type of thing, but I don't know if is just plain seaweed being sold to use as a cooking ingredient. I mean, they do it at Costco and things like that, but I there'll always be a segment that you can push to eat it, but in that way and cook with it. Yeah. But as an ingredient form, it's so easy to work with. And, we can make I think we were making a 40% kelp, 60% mushroom burger. This is a bunch of years ago. With kelp jerkies and bouillon cubes, chicken replacement bouillon cubes, because kelp is packed full of umami, right? It's a flavor enhancer, natural flavor enhancer. So we just make these basic cubes that you can use. So these things are very approachable to people and good. And I think that's the key to, you got to break out of the Brooklyn fetish market, for food that is looking for the next weird bug to eat. Right. Yeah. Are you in Brooklyn? I don't know if you're in Brooklyn. What's that? Are you in Brooklyn? No, I'm on the other coast. I'm in LA. Okay. So yeah, been to Brooklyn twice, but I was like, geez, I got to back off a little bit. Right. Everyone's like, this guy talks about Brooklyn all the time. So can we jump into kind of, how to start your own
ocean farm if people are, because that's kind of the whole thing is you're trying to encourage people to do this now, right?
Yeah. So we actually, GreenWave, the nonprofit, its job is, its mission is to train the next generation of ocean farmers. And we have one part of our programming that's kind of high touch, which is targeted to indigenous communities and fishermen directly impacted by climate change. We just helped start the first indigenous owned seaweed hatchery in the country. We work with the Maori in New Zealand, just all over the place. But then we have a low touch platform that's actually just coming online, which gives folks open source tools to design and plan their farms, budgets, gear buy lists, also permitting resources, all sorts of stuff. And we did that because we've got 6,000 people on our waiting list for training programs. And I was like, wow, there's no way we're going to train all these people. So, and this was pre-COVID, luckily enough, like, okay, let's start moving all this stuff online and figure out how to train people online. So that's going to be, the beta version's coming out in about a month, which is great. So that's one place to start, the GreenWave. The other thing is, you want to go down and find out who owns the water. In front of you. So here in New England, it's basically the town owns the first couple miles. So you lease grounds from the town. Then the state owns past that. And then past 6 miles, the federal government owns. So you want to go explore, figure out like, okay, can I get a lease? How do I do that? As sort of step one. And then step two is to just get a little bit of gear in the water. Because you have to find out, is it a good place to grow? Does the ocean want you to grow there? So you get a little bit of gear, just some buoys, some anchors, get a bit of seed, and just see what happens on your lines. And you find this in the GreenWave website, but you want a certain amount of growth per foot of line to make sure, because if you get 1 foot, 1 pound per foot, that's not enough to make a successful farm per acre, right? The numbers won't work out. You've got to have a minimum of 3 pounds per foot. So you just start small and you're building out from there, but you don't have to be a farmer. We need more hatcheries in the country. So if you want to start a hatchery, we need tons of entrepreneurs are starting value-added, companies, food and fertilizer and bioplastic companies. We need policy experts to imagine okay, what is this ocean zoning going to look like? Right? As it becomes bigger and bigger, we need economists, we need scientists to help stay ahead of the climate curve. I wish we had whole universities that were just dedicated to pumping out, because we're having to train everybody now. There's no one I can hire that knows how to do kelp hatcheries. I have to train every single one, right? I got no bench. So we need a bench. Yeah, man.
I mean, and so I'm just kind of thinking, because I'm this is something I could do even. It sounds awesome. Is it can it be done sort of anywhere? I mean, or like you said, you kind of need to test the area, but can I do it in the, off the Pacific here in Southern California? Is that happening?
Yeah. So in the Port of San Diego has a whole program. And also in Long Beach of growing 5 different kinds of seaweeds as a reforestation project, right? Because I want to say this, you can both farm, but you can also just reforest. So GreenWave has a project up in Humboldt which has acreage in just to do a per acre cost to replant the kelp forest, right? So, and that has value if you're capturing carbon and stuff like that should have economic value. So in California, we're seeing quite a bit of reforestation happening. Absolutely, in California, you need to get through the Coastal Commission and state waters, but it's a great place to grow. And there used to be millions of you look at the kelp forest that used to be in California, it's just stunning. And now in Northern California, 90% of kelp forests are gone. And those used to extend all the way down to, way past San Diego. So no, absolutely. The water temps are good. And the water quality is great for farming in the West Coast.
Cool, man. So what can like if you're looking to get into this, what do you need to expect as kind of an investment or how to get started, and then what can you expect to make from it?
Yeah. So it really depends on where, mainly because of, quite honestly, the depths of the water. So the more shallow it is, the less expensive it is because you don't need big. I've got some folks in Long Island that are growing 15 feet of kelp in 4 feet of water. It's just crazy.
Wow.
So they just wade out in their boots to farm kelp, right? Huh. So that's cheap. I grow in I'm only at about 20 feet of water. And so my farm costs about $20,000 to get up and running for like a 10-acre farm. And you can yield. So if you take a 10-acre farm, let's say out here in my farm in New England, you can, I always get this wrong, net, not gross, but net $100,000 or more. Like that's about the number. So it's a good way. It's hard. I mean, I'm breaking ice off the gunnels with sledgehammers and stuff. I mean, in the winter, it's hard work. You earn that money, but completely. Now on the West Coast, you're dealing with much deeper depths. So the expense goes up. So you're looking more at depends there, but even more like 50 grand startup costs. And then on top of those, you'll need some sort of boat, right? So, but I started with a 17-foot boat that I got for I think it was $600. Huh. So start small, and then once you start making money, invest in the business as you're growing out. So I'd say $20,000 to $50,000 startup cost, depending on where you are in the country, is what you need to get up to a scale where you're bringing in income. Yeah.
And so what you kind of mentioned it, like the work, but what's kind of your daily life like? What's the time requirement on it?
Yeah. So it depends on the species. Different species are more labor intensive. Kelp is not very labor intensive. But the more you check it and sort of care for it, the higher the survival rates. So I like to be on the water 3 times a week in the winter is a good amount of time. Usually go out for about 4 or 5 hours at a time, and then on land you're rigging gear and fixing stuff. So and certain times a year you're working 7 days a week during harvest season and seeding season and things like that. But
No, that makes sense. And then, so is this something that, because with GreenWave and what you guys are, you're focusing on kind of the, small farmer or individual person or group of people, right? Is that kind of what the goal is for that? Or is there opportunity for a bigger company to come in and do big things? Or are you trying to avoid that?
Well, I mean, we'd rather not. I mean, I don't want to be responsible for 1,000-acre banana plantations in the ocean. That's not really what I dream of.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're already seeing big companies come in, leasing grounds, planting massive farms. That is happening. And I think it's up to the food movement and other folks to say, okay, which one do we want? Right? We're going to build our model. And our model is a reef model. It's not like it's unscaled. It's, 25 to 50 farms in an area, a processing hub and a hatchery, and then a ring of entrepreneurs. It's a reef. And then you replicate that reef. Well, that 25 farms can produce easily 2 million pounds of kelp in 5 months.
Wow!
Right? So that's just kelp. And easily can do that. So networked production can really add up to scale. So it's not choice between big or small. It's what kind of scale do we want? And I like network production because benefits are distributed. They don't concentrate at the top. There's not vertical integration. All the things I get excited about in this sector is we get to build a system from the bottom up, right? We get to do food right to make sure we don't privatize our seed, to make sure folks that have just been left behind in the Industrial Revolution and were excluded, black and brown folks, making sure that we do polyculture, not monoculture, all these principles we can embed into the DNA of it. Now, big corporations might take it and completely screw it up. Well, we're going to try our route. That's all I can do. I'm fine if I die failing. I got no problem with that.
Dude, but I mean, yeah, you're trying your best. I love that you're learning from the mistakes of other industries and things in the past, And I like the route that you're on and what you guys are doing at GreenWave, man. It's awesome. It's really encouraging and fun to watch too.
Thanks so much.
So I think for people listening who are like into this, let's give them some resources of where to go, where to get your book, where should we send people?
Yeah, great. So greenwave.org is our nonprofit. Lots of information on there. You can poke around and more is going to be added over the next few months as we roll out the platform. The book is Eat Like a Fish. And get that, lots of local booksellers that you can get it from. And there's some recipes in there. And it actually won the Beard Award for writing last year, which is
right on. Congrats.
Which is great. But it's a salty tale, like there's probably an age bracket in there somewhere. So like, careful of homeschooling.
Sure.
And then if you go to GreenWave, there are a bunch of ways you can engage and get involved. You can donate to support some farmers getting trained. You can hold house parties. You can help on policy issues, things like that. So I really encourage everybody to engage in some way.
Yeah, man. That I was reading about the house party idea. That's such a good idea. I'm gonna do that because I've been telling all my friends about this stuff. So I'm gonna make them come over for a house party and cook them some seaweed, something. Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds awesome.
Damn. Well, this is great, Bren. Anything else that you want to impart on people or share or anything like that, or did we do a good job of covering stuff?
No, I think we covered. I just we started about what a fisherman is. We've got a climate crisis. But I think one of the keys to solving the climate crisis is solving this sort of cultural crisis of meaninglessness. Like we need to create jobs that are soul filling, right? And that's what I like about this. I come from a culture where people write songs about our work, right? Songs about fishermen, right? And that's what we want. We want like jobs with poetry and meaning. And I feel like if we can tap into that sense of agency of all of us together with meaning, solving the climate crisis, then this becomes a really good time, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's really exciting. I think that's my takeaway. Like the climate crisis is like it's a moment where we need to think about like the soul of people at the same time in order to solve the environmental challenge.
Right. Love it. Cool. Well, thanks again, Bren. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Good stuff. Good stuff, huh? Am I right? Isn't that exciting? Like all the benefits that ocean farming has, that it can do for us, that we can eat it, that it can, be cheaper and save all the global warming issues in the planet. I just love it so much. I'm so excited to watch and see where this goes in the future. So thank you to Bren for being on here and sharing that information with all of us. Thank you to you for being one of those people he got to share the information with and listening to the end of the episode and hearing me talk right now. So that's what I got to say. I got to thank you for that. And that's the end of the episode. I'm Travis DeRose. You can email me at travis@curiosityness.com with your thoughts and ideas and feedback and stuff like that. Whatever you want to say, I'll listen. And I'm on Instagram at Trav DeRose. And I'll see you in episode 98. Or almost to 100. Okay. Bye.